Everyone is so well behaved right now. I want to be my smooth, soothing voice. And the dogs are well behaved too. So that's good. So the more the dogs bark, the shorter the sermon gets. So I'm going. Okay. So about 800 years before Jesus was born, the nation of Aram was the big boy on the block of the ancient Near East, and they loved to pick on the Israelites. And one of the things they did was they came in to Israel, and they would pick on little towns and villages. They wouldn't go to the big cities. The big cities had walls around them, and it would take about 6 months to a year to lay siege to a city, and who has time for that? So the low-hanging fruit were the little towns and villages. They could just run right over them, which is what they did. They would go in, completely level it, burn it to the ground. And they did it for two reasons. One was to terrorize the nation, hoping that their terror would get to the king, and the king would pay more money to Aram. And second is the soldiers wanted to collect what they could from the towns and villages. And that meant collecting livestock, things of value like precious metals, jewelry, things like that, and people to enslave. And about 800 years before Jesus, there was a raiding party that went into Israel and laid waste to a town or village. We don't know which one. Completely decimated it. They would have killed almost everyone. They would have taken its livestock. They would have taken its precious metals, and they would have taken people that they could enslave, including a little girl, a little Israelite girl, probably somewhere in the range of like 9 to 14 years old. She goes back to Aram and is a slave there. Two things. First, I just want you to put yourself in her shoes for a second. She's lost absolutely everything. Everything she knew, probably almost, if not all, the people that she loved, her entire way of life, and her freedom at maybe 9 to 14 years old. Okay? The second thing to know is that if there was one little bit of blessing that she was given, one little bit of fortune that she was allowed to have, was that she served in the home of the second most important person in Aram, the guy who ran the armies. His name was Naaman. So she wasn't out in a field somewhere, but she had probably a nice home with lots of accommodations. That was the one little blessing that she was afforded. Naaman, the man who owned her, had a problem. He had leprosy, a very painful disease physically. It was also painful emotionally because everyone knew you had it. They just look at you and like your nose was about to fall off, right? And so no one wanted to be around you. And so very painful when no one wants to touch you, be around you. It's embarrassing, particularly for the second most powerful person in Aram. Very, very embarrassing. And one day he is talking about this horrible affliction that he has, and the little Israelite slave girl is present, and she speaks up. We first need to pause and just imagine the audacity of her speaking up. We have that horrible saying that children should be seen and not heard. Well, slave children should be neither seen nor heard. Right? They ushered in a little bowl of fruit and then they were to disappear as if they were never there. She spoke up in this room of powerful, important people. This could have gone very badly for her. Can you imagine the whole room just turning and like, did she speak? Like, what? And what does she speak? But I wish you were in my home because in my country we have someone that could help you. Well, how dare you speak up in this group? How dare you think that your pitiful little nation is better than mine? It could have gone very badly. We need to remember the bravery of this little girl. Some of us have girls. Some of us have granddaughters. Some of us have neighbors that have little girls. There's a lot of stories in the Bible about boys. It was a very patriarchal culture, right? I feel like our girls need to know this story and know the audacious boldness of this little girl and just be incredibly impressed. And if that's the only thing we walked away from this story with, it would be enough. The second thing is what she said. Again, put yourself back in her shoes. If you had lost everything, and the guy Naaman who owns you now, he wasn't the one who came in and raided your town or village, but he's the guy who sends the people to go raid your town or village, right? He's the guy in charge. I mean, all of her problems went back to him. What could you imagine that she could have felt towards him? I don't know what this is. Hold on one second. That's not part of the sermon. I could imagine feeling incredible hatred and vitriol for him. And frankly, if she did, no one would blame her a bit, right? 3,000 years later, we'd still be like, yep, serves him right. But instead of hating, she speaks a word of compassion and healing. If you were in my home, there's a man who could heal you. I'm not sure even as a priest I could summon that kind of graciousness to the very person who completely destroyed my life. But there she does. And out of that, Naaman amazingly hears her, amazingly says, okay, I'm going to look into that. He sends a letter to the king of Israel saying, I hear that you have someone that can heal me. The king of Israel receives this letter like, oh my goodness, one of the most powerful people in the world thinks I can help him, and I have no idea how to help him. This is going to be very bad. Elisha, the prophet, student of the prophet Elijah, gets word of this and says to the king, don't worry, send him to me. So the king of Israel sends Naaman on to Elisha. Elisha says, go wash in the Jordan River 7 times. Naaman says, I don't think so. Then he relents and he's healed. And out of that healing, he says, they're the last words of the reading we have today. He says, I know there is no God in the world except this God, which is an incredible sentence. I mean, we don't quite understand how incredible it is. In our world, religions are discrete and separate. You're either one or another. You're either Christian or you're Jewish or you're Muslim or you're Hindu or you're something else or nothing at all. But you aren't Christian and Hindu, usually. You aren't Jewish and Muslim, usually. You pick one. We usually see religion as being something that is exclusive. In those days, they didn't at all. At all. Like, I had my gods, but those people over there, they have their gods too, and that's lovely. And those people, they have their gods. If Naaman had said, okay, now I recognize the God of Israel as well, too, that would have been interesting. It would have been notable, but that's not what he says. He says, I know of no God in the world except this one. If this story was in the New Testament, we would call this story the conversion of Naaman. And how was he converted? Literally bodily and heart and soul? Well, yes, by the healing power of God and by the prophetic powers of Elisha. But if you look all the way back to the beginning of the story, the first domino that fell was a little Israelite slave girl who spoke up. And she spoke words of compassion and non-judgmental healing, which sounds remarkably similar to a guy who would follow her 800 years later, who would say things like, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. She would never know Jesus. He would live, almost 1,000 years after her. But she echoes his teachings. It's remarkable. We don't know her name, which makes me a little sad. I wish we knew her name. She was a slave girl, so no one really bothered to ask, I guess. And the author of 2 Kings doesn't tell us what her name is. If we knew her name, things would still be named after her, right? There would be ministries. If her name was like Rachel, there would be like a Rachel Society and a Rachel Ministries, and they would like go in and there'd be hospitals named after this young girl. But we don't know her name, so she doesn't get all of those accolades. But we have names, and we can act like her in her stead. We also have little icons, I think, of her kind of and Jesus's kind of non-judgmental love and compassion. And today, those icons are the really quiet little fuzzy creatures who are sitting at each of our feet, some of our feet. Pet blessings was a thing that it's on or around St. Francis Day, and was originally done for flocks and herds. You would bless them so that they would increase. Not many of us have flocks and herds, but we have other furry creatures that sometimes live in our homes and bring us incredible joy. And they are icons of unconditional love. Do we have a chicken? There is a chicken, probably a very scared chicken right now. A chicken in a cat carrier in a room full of dogs. So I don't know how much non-judgmental compassion Pepper the chicken shows. I mean, some. Junie the chicken shows. But dogs particularly do so. And so today we bless them as they bless us each and every day. And so I want you to remember that, but don't, as you leave here, forget that little girl. Don't forget her. Act in her name. Amen.